Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jenna from RPCVW speaking, and I would like to introduce the No White Saviors team. We're really grateful to have them today. So with that, I'll just pass it right over to them.
Hi, Jenna and the rest of the team. Thank you for having us. A thank you to all those that have joined us today. My name is Lubega Wendy, a team member at the No White Saviors. I will let my colleagues Kelsey, Olivia, and Rwothomio introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alaso Olivia Patience. I'm a team member at the No White Saviors. Thank you all for joining in for this session. Hope to interact and hear more from all of you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rwothomio Gabriel, a team member in the No White Saviors, and I'm very glad to be here with you all, hoping to engage in positive discourse, and very glad to have you and to be invited for this workshop. Thank you.
I am Kelsey Nielsen, also a team member at No White Saviors, currently in Philadelphia, headed back to Kampala in a few days.
Thank you, my colleague Kelsey Rwothomio. I guess we will start off we would like to note a few points we hope you all have access to the sessions plan. So for questions that are within the sessions plan, if you have answers to the questions, share your answer in the chat, because we have such limited amount of time. We can't be able to let all of you answer and then be able to go through the entire sessions plan. So for answers, share your answers in the chat. So for today's session, for today's dialogue, we will be reflecting on the white savior industrial complex and what it means to decolonize partnerships in aid and development sector. We will start off by talking about the white savior industrial complex, highlighting why impact matters more than intention. And with that, I would like to invite Olivia to dive in, talk a little bit more about the white savior industrial complex.
Thank you, Wendy, and to everyone on the call. So today we're going to start by defining and unpacking white saviorism. I hope everyone got the outline. You can check through and see how we're going to flow with this session. So as No White Saviors, as a team, we have a definition of what white saviorism is. And we define it as a symptom of racism and white supremacy, which places those in position of privilege in more of a role of a savior over those that have been historically oppressed and exploited. And the reason why we always define it and say that it is a symptom of racism and white supremacy is because white saviorism is a disease which has no cure. So for people to fully understand what we talk about with our work, we gave it this definition. And as we continue to unpack white saviorism as an ideology, I would love to, for people that are on the call, to feel free to go into the chat and answer this question. Given our definition as a team of white saviorism, can you identify examples where you've seen it perpetuated? It might be during your work or at your workplace or at home or anywhere. So feel free to share in the chat as we get to know white saviorism as an ideology. What do we mean when we say white saviorism as an ideology? We want people to note that in most cases when we talk about white saviorism, people tend to think that it's only white people that perpetuate this behavior. No, it can also be perpetuated by Black people, brown people, indigenous people. And the reason why we need to understand this fully is because white saviorism, like white supremacy, is a reward system. If you align with whiteness, then you have this illusion that there is protection, there is power that is going to be given to you. So we need to know that much as people predominantly think that it's white people, it also exists in people of color, Black people, indigenous and brown people. And then also, as we continue to go through white saviorism as an ideology, we have a question there that we want you to reflect as we are going through this segment. Have you, as an individual, been complicit in upholding white savior ideologies and stroke power dynamics? So this question is a set that you should reflect as you're at work or with your colleagues or at home. It's still the same thing. White saviorism surrounds us every day. It might be with your colleague or in your workspace. So it's good you share with us and tell us. We have someone in the chat and they're trying to share their experience. I don't know if Wendy, you can reach out for that chat. Let me just try to see if I can.
I think please let's focus on going through the sessions plan. Whatever time remains, we'll go to pick up on what is in the chat.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Wendy. So that's the question there. And then when we come here, we have just talked through what white saviorism is, the ideology. So we are now breaking it down to why it is dangerous. Why is white saviorism dangerous? After getting to know it is a symptom of racism and white supremacy. So we are saying, why is it dangerous? And we're saying in that outline, when you read through that, the white savior industrial complex always disguises itself as a humanitarian aid, like something that is always wanting to help, something that is always wanting to solve the problems. But when we analyze fully that if you're coming to solve problems of people that you've colonized, people that you've exploited, are you the right person to bring in these solutions? Is something that we have to all think about. Are you going to be fair with your solutions? Are you going to reflect on the problems that you caused these countries or these communities? That is very important for us to know. Are you coming in realizing that we have history of slavery in Africa, and slave trade didn't leave the African continent the way it got it? It took everything from us. It destroyed us. Look at people now trying to trace back their identity, trying to struggle every day with finding where they came from. So we need to understand that it instead helps to maintain the status quo of wanting to save all the time. If you're coming to Africa, it's about saving Black people, it's about saving African children. So we need to also understand that. And also, as we continue with the session, there's a question there. And the question is, we want you to reflect on why people in the global North cannot be expected to effectively solve problems impacting communities in the global South. What limitations? So we're asking that people in the global North are always coming in to solve problems in the global South. What limits us, people from the global South, from doing this? So you can still reflect that question in the chat. And so as we continue with why white saviorism is dangerous, we're saying it's not just a problematic selfie. Like someone will say, oh, this is just a selfie with a Black child. Like there's nothing there. It gets more to that. Like there's trauma, there's severe in some cases, there's been death of white saviorism because of the trust that is given to white people when they stay in Black and brown communities. And this is an example that we normally give of Renee Bach, an American with no experience, came here in Uganda and practiced medicine on Ugandan children. And there was death. 105 children died under her care. And all she was doing was looking at the internet and treating our children, giving them the treatment without actually ever going to school for that. And also another example is Gabriel. He's a US national that went to Kenya as a missionary, and he actually sexually abused children, and he's sitting in prison in the United States. So you see how white saviorism is so dangerous, is that when you come, we give you the trust. We give you the benefit of doubt. Nobody asks you in our community, but we are saying, as we are reflecting, when you go to those communities, do you actually realize that you're going to interact with human beings who have the same feelings with you? And if you can't do something at home, why do you think you can do it in another country? Why do you think Africa is the right place for you to do that, or South America, or a different part of the world? If in your home country that is illegal, why is it not illegal in other places? Why do we change this? Also, look at how white saviorism is perpetuated in movies and novels. And we give an example of the machine gun preacher. You see that in most cases, still, it's what we're talking about. There's always a white person that comes in the space to save people, brown, Black, indigenous. There's always someone there that is running to save the day. And this narrative doesn't stop in the books, but when people watch a movie, they want to reflect on that movie. They want to do what they saw in the movie. So that is why this is so dangerous, because they're continuing to promote it, and people who access this literature or material feel that, oh, since it is out there for the world to see, then it's the right way to go. It's the right thing to do, but it is not the right thing to do, because in most cases, we are looking at Black people as the victims. The narrative is always around us. It's always around the Black people. I'll just share with you, I won't mention the organization, but I'm just going to give you an example of a call we're on today, actually. And these people said that, you know what, we do a fundraising strategy, but we use photos of children in Africa, and yet white children also benefit from this program, but the photos used for fundraising are African children. So when we talk about the narrative being around Black people, then it's 100%, because even white people, even the white children in this incident need the help, but the Black children are the tool for fundraising. So, and as Black people, we are actually tired of this narrative. Like, we are being to us, it is somewhere. And also, when we look at, before we actually get into another segment of dismantling white supremacy, I'd love us to get to the chat still and reflect on this. How has the Peace Corps impacted host communities over the years? How has this impact been measured?
For this question, we would love people to unmute themselves. They could be returned Peace Corps volunteer to answer this question. Just 2 minutes of your time, anyone.
Thank you, Wendy.
Could you possibly repeat the question in case anyone missed what's being asked?
Oh, let me repeat it. It's how has the Peace Corps impacted host communities over the years, and how is this impact measured? Because you're still going to these communities, you're still there.
I would argue that from a volunteer standpoint, that's probably like one of the biggest issues, is that we're not necessarily like included in understanding and measuring impact. And so from our standpoint, that can get very confusing. But then also in general, I feel like, so I for context, I served as a TEFL volunteer in Ukraine. So I was not in Africa, but still the same concept of white saviorism is the same whether you're in Ukraine or in Africa. And I think that at least for Peace Corps Ukraine, I felt that they promoted the idea of creating relationships with those in their communities. And that's how, at least for what I remember, that's how we were kind of told and taught whether or not we were being impactful. But like, we weren't necessarily told like you have to improve English language skills by X points, if that makes sense. Is that kind of what you're looking for, or did I interpret your question differently?
That's really, Natalie, what we were looking for. But to be quite honest, host communities are communities with real people, real problems, besides friendship, creating good relationship. These are communities, let's say it's the education part of volunteering within Peace Corps. There are schools within host communities that lack housing for teachers, okay? That lack so many things. So what is peace, besides sending people over to teach English and create a good relationship? What is Peace Corps tangibly helping with host community instead of taking up space? So I'll give an example. I've had friends within the Peace Corps, within the education program here in Uganda, that have taken up housing for teachers in rural areas, and the teachers that are supposed to occupy those houses have been pushed further into the village. But remember, they have the skills that they want to teach. They get on their bikes for 3 hours to ride to school, and an American volunteer is staying in the house where he's supposed to stay. So what does this say about Peace Corps? So how tangibly are we impacting host communities besides creating relationships? Because these are communities with real people, real issues, real problems. You're disrupting, distracting, taking up time, very little resources that would have been used otherwise, and not doing anything.
And
So
maybe Wendy,
can
I just add
here? There was someone who was raising their hand first. They have a profile picture, but it's called guest. You have a pretty sunset in the background. I'm not sure your name.
It's me, it's Nia.
Oh, Nia, I thought it was Nia, but it says guest. Hi, Nia.
I don't know why
Nia.
it says guest. But hello, good morning to everyone from Arizona. I think that this is a really great question. And if I may give 2 thoughts about it. Firstly, this is a question that I had put forth during my pre-service training, because I was just interested in knowing, where do I fit in the historical context of Peace Corps in Uganda, because it's one of the oldest Peace Corps programs that there are. I think it started somewhere in the early 60s when the Peace Corps itself started. And the response that I got back was that there wasn't any documentation about it. And during my Peace Corps service, there was an audit, I think, of some Peace Corps programs within the region. And one of the biggest issues was that there was no documentation. There was no files from the filing system in the office was just not up to par. There was no way to know the real impact of Peace Corps. And I think that Peace Corps in Uganda. And I think that there was some type of push during my service from Ugandans to really understand what Peace Corps is. And it was probably the first year that they had written an impact report at all. So I thought that was interesting. And then to what Wendy was saying, it's just like, we are coming in and creating problems within the community. And we as volunteers and even RPCVs need to talk about that. We need to be more vocal about it and also be the ones pushing for impact reports and things like that. That's just what I have to say.
Thank you, Nia.
Can I interject here?
Because of time, Spencer, we will have to move to the next part. We'll have time, a little bit of time for questions at the end.
I have a comment, but that's okay. I can save that for later.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for everybody who shared with us that. In the interest of time, would love to I'd love to call on the next speaker, who's going to be Kelsey, to take us through how we can tangibly dismantle white saviorism. Please, Kelsey.
Thank you. Sorry, my Zoom on my computer decided to crash, so I am joining from my phone. Good thing we have multiple sources of technology. We always joke because as much as there's issues with internet in Uganda, I tend to have more issues when I'm in the US. So I think it's just kind of trying to prove a point. So just jumping in off of what we were already talking about, and thank you, Nia, for what you shared. Just for those who don't know, Nia was one of the first supporters of No White Saviors in the very beginning, came and attended one of the first events. I'm sure that was controversial for her to do as a Peace Corps volunteer. We haven't had the best, Peace Corps is not the biggest fan, I think, overall of No White Saviors, because we've named a lot of the harm and a lot of the problems, right? And that kind of goes into what I'm going to talk about a little bit, is that we get to decide if we are going to maintain the status quo, or we're going to disrupt that, right? And that can happen from within a system, but it's a lot harder to do that within a system that is built on imperialism, built on the legacy of colonialism, built on anti-Blackness and white supremacy. It's a lot easier to do it in the way that No White Saviors is, from an outside perspective, right? We build a platform, we've had conversations, we have a lot of people within the system who might not be the biggest fans of what we do or what we're saying, but we don't have, no one within the system can have us lose our jobs, in other words. But when you're challenging these systems from inside, from the internal, you are risking your jobs. And oftentimes that falls on the labor of Black women in particular, Black queer folks, Black Indigenous people, and people of color in general though. White folks, we are the ones that benefit from this system, and we are the least likely, just throughout history, we can see that we are the least likely to actually disrupt it because we benefit from it. We are protected by it. We have unearned privilege, power, and protection because of it. So the first thing when we talk about disrupting and decolonizing something like Peace Corps, I think a lot of us on the call would say it's possible. It's possible to decolonize it or to reform it. Some of us would say it just needs to go completely. There's no way. It has to be completely, it would have to be a completely new organization for it to be anything decolonized and ethical and about justice in a real sense. So the first practice in that is asking ourselves, if we wouldn't do it, if we wouldn't want it done in our own communities, we shouldn't be doing it abroad. So if we wouldn't want unskilled folks to come in and volunteer at our kids' schools and teach them language and teach them, we shouldn't be doing the same thing. We have to put ourselves in the shoes of, if we were in that community, do we think we should just be happy and grateful for what we can get, the scraps, or should we be focused on trying to maintain and get to that same level of best practice and the same quality of resource, the same quality of service? We need to move, we always say we need to move from charity to justice. The white savior industrial complex is built on giving charity, giving aid. Disrupting that, decolonizing it, deconstructing it would really be about challenging the system, challenging the structures that exist. And instead of having to constantly respond to the symptom of systems of oppression, we would actually be getting at the root of the issue and disrupting the system altogether. Thirdly, the importance of community-led initiatives. I think that there obviously, we always talk about also that representation is not enough. It's one thing to have individuals from diverse backgrounds as part of a team. It's another to make sure that the power structures reflect the community in which we're working in. And I think if we're honest, even if that means that you have a Black American director in Uganda, there's still a disconnect in terms of levels of power, access, and privilege. I get that we understand it's an American program, but when the interventions are we have to pay the most attention to how it's affecting the community that we're in. The power dynamics and how decisions are made, how funding is used, who gets to make those decisions, how many people have a seat at the table of those conversations and that decision-making process that reflect the actual communities that Peace Corps is working in and sending volunteers to. The last thing would be getting honest about the past, especially for us as white folks. We need to start telling the truth more, telling the truth about the history and background of Peace Corps, telling the history of our ancestors, the way in which we've benefited from a system that has killed, enslaved, and colonized Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We need to stop whitewashing history, and we need to start teaching our own children and ourselves the true history. Until there's no racial reconciliation or bridge building, until we get honest about what the history has been, and until we start to work towards reparations and repair of that. We can't just paint it with a broad brush or a whitewash brush and try to be less overtly racist. We need to get at the root causes of what we've created and the way we benefit, and make drastic changes in the other direction. If we're honest, if we look at it and we're honest and we're not looking away when we get uncomfortable. We talk about it's necessary. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not listening. So with that, I think we have one question, and then we'll move to Wendy and Rwothomio. Liv, can you help me with the question? Because my computer crashed, so I don't have the outline up.
Oh, yeah. So thank you, Kelsey. The question here is, when considering all social media and marketing content you have published, would you feel comfortable with your own story and images, or that of your loved ones, being used in this way? The question is in the chat. Thank you, Kelsey. As people exchange different ideas on the question, I would love to invite Wendy and Rwothomio for the next question, for the next session of decolonizing partnerships and other concepts. So please, Wendy, you can take the floor.
Thank you, Liv. I was pulling up the document. Yeah, I feel like in general, the word decolonization has been watered down. It sounds like we can decolonize everything. People are talking about decolonizing this cup. And that's how all movements by Black and Brown people have been co-opted, watered down to mean nothing. And in the process, the fight for liberation, the fight for justice has been lost, because outsiders keep coming in and, watering down and using the word however way they want to. But in all this, we need to understand that decolonization is a verb. For us, the colonized, and for us who are still colonized, it's something that we constantly have to grapple with on a daily basis. From the kind of education that we get, whether formal or informal, to what is told to us about what Jesus looks like, to the legal systems that inform the way the police operates in a country like Uganda. Everything has to be decolonized. We need to think of colonialism as something that did not end. We need to think of colonialism as coloniality. We need to think of ourselves, we Ugandans, we Black and brown people, we people that are from countries that have been overly exploited. We need to think about colonization as something that is ongoing, ever present in our books, in the movies, in whatever aspect of our lives. That is when we can now begin to talk of decolonization. So with that, we have a few concepts, or before that, there's a question. Episcopes, can it be decolonized or must it be abolished? Looking at the survey questions that you all filled, it looks like, Kelsey, correct me if I'm right, was there a tie between abolishing and decolonization? What did that look like?
Yeah, I remember it being a pretty big tie. What happened was, I would say a little bit, most people were saying it could reform. The majority, it was like 60% said it could reform. The rest had answers more in line with like, yeah, you need to abolish it. So there's a good percentage of people on this call that believe Peace Corps needs to be abolished.
Yeah, thank you. But let's all be honest. Can we reform an institution that was not meant to reform? This sounds like decolonizing white Christianity. Wow, can we? Is that even possible? So I think that's something for us to reflect on. Are agencies like the Peace Corps created to be reformed, or they are created to serve interests of, American imperialism? Will they exist anymore once they don't serve that interest? Can they reform to serve the interests of both host communities and American citizens? Is that even possible? So there are a few concepts below that question that I've shared the definitions to these concepts in the charts. Can all keep reading through colonization, coloniality, decolonization, and decoloniality. The definitions to those concepts, we got them from a book written by a Ugandan called Sylvia Tamale. The book is Afrofeminism and Decolonization. If you want to read more, you can find the book online. I don't know, Kelsey, can you share a link to the book or anything?
Absolutely, I'll send it in the chat.
The next question, what does it really mean to decolonize? Do you think it's possible? Do we all think it's possible to reform, to decolonize agencies like the Peace Corps? Do we, when we say things like decolonizing Christianity, decolonizing mission and development work, do we think it's possible? Were these paces created to be reformed or to be abolished? And I think for me as a Black woman and a Ugandan, if we say things like decolonizing Peace Corps, or I don't, from what I've shared, I'm not dismissing what Peace Corps has done entirely, but from the examples that I've experienced, that I've seen firsthand, I think maybe we abolish and start from a fresh new foundation, because it looks like the interests that the agents wanted to serve then are not the same anymore. The world has changed. People can see things. Let me say, people can see bullshit. So yeah, with that, there's a definition of decolonization by Sylvia Tamale, but like I said, we did share that in the chat. The next question is, what structures within agencies like the Peace Corps sustain and uphold a colonial mentality? Decolonization requires that we take a critical and honest look at all the ways in which white supremacy and colonial domination have hijacked culture, system, values, and beliefs. It requires reclaiming traditional practices and doing away with the binary system of understanding. For what I know, white culture, white supremacy, for it to be able to understand a certain concept, they have to put that concept into boxes. It's very binary. It's a girl or a boy. If it's not a girl or a boy, then you're othered. I'd like to bring up this example because at the moment we're having a huge problem of homophobia on the African continent. And you have a lot of Ugandans, a lot of people from Ghana, or a few other Nigerians saying, oh, this whole concept of gay is not African. But that has to do a lot with how colonialism interfered with the history of all these countries before colonialism. So you find, because most of these countries were very oral in how they passed on their history. And once colonialism happened, because it's about writing down, white culture is about writing down, it's about boxing things, you find there is no reference to anything that is pre-colonial. So even when I want to make an argument for and be like, no, guys, homophobia is very colonial. It was not there before. There's no reference. So because there's no reference, I find myself out of breath, out of answers. I can't defend my friends because there's no reference. And that's really what white supremacy is about. If you can't be in A and B, then you're othered. If you do not fit into the Eurocentric standards of beauty, the Eurocentric standards of knowledge, if you cannot speak Spanish and French and English, and you only speak Swahili and Luganda and Lusoga, you're not multilingual. Like, you have to fit in within two boxes, or if not that, then you're outside the picture. So with that, I would like to invite Rwothomio to talk about what decolonization in action looks like. Are agencies like the Peace Corps making decolonization a reality rather than simply a theory? That's if they should be decolonized or abolished.
Thank you, Wendy. Hello, everyone. To simply highlight what Wendy has mentioned, what does decolonization in action look like? This isn't merely just talking the talk, but rather walking the path that you talk, putting your thoughts into action. And started off, the first one is to challenge the power structures and dynamics at play. And this is first exhibited by acknowledging the power that you hold as an individual, say from Peace Corps, acknowledging the position that you hold, the power dynamics that you benefit from. Oftentimes you'll have individuals claim innocence by stating that they weren't involved in it, but whether you are directly or indirectly involved, it still stands to reason that you are benefiting from it. Additionally, when we talk about challenging power structures, we have to understand that you have to look at it not from your own perspective, which is why when we bring up the question of reformation or abolishment, people who often mention reformation they say it from their point of view. They want to stick to something that was given birth to through colonialism and even power dynamics, imperialism, and not actually taking into account what actually benefits the people at the receiving end, the people who are more affected by it. We often find these communities would rather have an abolishment stance than have a reformation, rather be free of harm than have the harm continuously be experienced in small tokens. Additionally, the second point would be the overall culture and institutional ethos that informs practices within agencies like the Peace Corps. Like, what is the practice? Are people free to express themselves? Say a returned Peace Corps volunteer has seen an issue within the systems. Are they able to, have their opinions heard and changes instilled? Or can they even be whistleblowers? Or rather, is it a polarized situation whereby it's either you agree with us, or you're out? It's either that you either agree with what we are doing or you get out. Also, representation. And you often find that we live in an age where we view stuff in quarters. We have done our profit quarter of the year. We have our diverse quarter of the year. We need to understand that merely having someone on your team isn't enough. What say does this person have? What power does this person have in making decisions? What power do the communities that you are in? What say do they have? Can they have the opportunity to say no if PISCO comes up with a plan? Or is it oftentimes that they always have to accept what has been brought off just so PISCO can, check up a box and highlight to the world that, hey, we did this, we managed to fill up our quota and what have you. And giving up power. As you continue to learn the colonial processes that have been put in place on the African continent, or rather in the global south, you as an individual from the global north, are you willing to give up power, not in the sense of equality, but rather equity, to create a balanced playground where an individual or communities that have been historically oppressed, marginalized, and exploited are able to have a say, are able to have their voices heard, their opinions respected? Because we often have individuals claim that very many people are silent. It's not that people are silent, it's that their voices are being silenced. So for their voices to be heard, are you willing to give up the power? Are you willing to, as a Peace Corps volunteer, understand the power dynamics that you're benefiting from and let it all just go? Lastly, ethical storytelling. And in this, you often have volunteers on the gram or social media, capturing imagery, photography, and having to create this narrative that justifies their presence on the continent, that justifies their actions. And in doing so, often erase the humanity of the individuals in the photo, or erase the humanity and the dignity of the community that they are in. And when you even look at the concept of informed consent, or even consent as it is, you find that people will often have this narrative that, oh, I just asked for their permission, so it's okay. But the people who you're asking for permission, do they know what their photo is going to be used for? Do they know the story that you are going to tell of them? Because oftentimes what you do is you tell your story of them to the world rather than their own story. With that being said, there's a question here. I will have a team member. If there's a team member who can copy it into the chat, please do feel free to answer in the chat. What resistance or barriers are present when working to decolonize agencies like the Peace Corps? In what ways does the culture within the Peace Corps need to shift to be more supportive of this process?
I did share it in the chat. You can move on.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. So the first point is acknowledging the intersectional nature of oppression when considering all aspects of identity. One of the most dangerous things someone in a position of an unprivilege or power can do is to ignore this. When you go into these communities, do you understand the intersections of privilege that you have, being someone from the global north, being someone with an American passport, being someone who is racially identified as white, or someone who is closest to whiteness? Or say even in the other aspect of oppression, these are communities, say, not only being in the global south, but they would say come from areas that have been marginalized within their own countries, ethnic groups that have been put aside and have often faced the bruntness of current political systems or financial systems in place. Exceptionalism and the good white person syndrome, to quote a famous person whose name can't come to mind right now, we're all trying to be different, which all makes us the same. When you have individuals who try to be the exception, who try to highlight themselves as being different, and this can be manifested on an individual plane and also organizational plane and even national plane. We often talk about American exceptionalism and how it's detrimental to everyone else. And finally, do we truly respect the cultures and ways of knowing of host communities? You have to understand that you will never fully agree with the practices of other individuals, but what you can do is to respect them. You can't fully agree with whatever is out there in the world. There will be chances and scenarios where you do not agree with the practice, but the vital component of it all, the vital component to decolonization, is to respect and understand that not everything has to be a monolith, that there are worlds outside of your own, cultures outside of your own understanding, and to view and measure it all in your own personal lens is to hold it stagnant, is to hold understanding of cultures and the way of knowing of host communities stagnant, often to Western understanding.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
I guess we would like to open the chat for questions, starting off with the last question, Rwothomio, that I shared in the chat. And for those that want to answer, unmute yourselves and, engage. What would decolonial partnerships within the Peace Corps look like? Reflecting on what we've shared above and your time of service, what else would you include? It doesn't necessarily have to be within the Peace Corps. It could be people working within different organizations within the aid and development sector. What would decolonial partnerships look like?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Jade.
Hello, yes, this is Jade Wu, and I just wanted to offer some input. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Malawi about 25 years ago, and I am also an immigrant to the US. I'm an Asian American, and when I joined the Peace Corps initially, it was over 120 in my initial group. And I was very surprised because we only had 3 immigrants that were part of that group. And I could see that when we got to Malawi, the 3 of us who were immigrants to the US, who later on became American citizens, saw Malawi differently. We were more accepting of cultural values and parental respect and cultural respect, more so than, I should say, my white colleagues were. And so the thing that really stood out to me in Peace Corps, and subsequently, because I worked in 6 other countries afterwards, is this notion that when we Americans go abroad, we are giving them, this host country, something. Either we're giving them training, or we're giving them gifts in kind, like food, clothes, medicine, and it must be good. It must be good for them, and they want it, and they're happy to get it. And as I worked from one country to the next, I saw that that was not always the case. And I really think that it has a lot to do with the conversation between the host country and the US, and that the host country should be more, I should say, I don't know how this would come about, but speak louder in terms of, this is the type of aid we need, and we need it this way. And there should be some negotiation going on. A very pointed example that I experienced many years later was in Afghanistan. I became a lawyer after Peace Corps and worked in different countries. And when Afghanistan became big for the US, I went on a rule of law program in Afghanistan. And we lawyers were providing legal training to the lawyers and judges in Afghanistan. And I could just see that the Afghans that I was teaching there, having training sessions, they were coming to our class not because they really bought into our beliefs, our values, but because they were being paid $5 US a day, and that's what they wanted to collect. These people are not rich. So I really think that there needs to be a more involved conversation between the host country and the US, and more people from the host country, or I should say at least natives from the host country, involved with designing these American programs. That's what I have to say.
Real quick, just want to note and shout out Decolonizing Peace Corps, because they were just mentioned in the chat. We were going to mention y'all. I know some of you might be on the call. They are especially the Black folks in that organization are the voices that everyone needs to be listening to. And I would think that probably they've had a lot of similar experiences to No White Saviors, in that people kind of write us off at being too radical or too extreme in our viewpoints. But these are individuals who have lived on both sides of the conversation. They've seen the harm perpetuated and experienced it themselves, and they've been part of that within the system of Peace Corps. So I really hope folks are leaning into those uncomfortable and necessary conversations, and knowing that the Decolonizing Peace Corps folks, they're on Instagram and Facebook, I believe. And we just really respect what they've been doing, the conversations they've been having, and believe the work they are doing is extremely necessary. So want to just amplify that and know that because we are not Peace Corps volunteers, that we want to always shift that and make sure to highlight people who are actually living that and doing that work.
I just wanted to touch on what Jade had mentioned. When you look at the conversations or interactions that go between these, say, host countries and United States, you find that the power dynamics there aren't even. When you even take into account the creation of Peace Corps in itself, it wasn't an equal say. It was basically one bully forcing another nation to take in its citizens so that it could have a more social reach of its imperialism. Taking into account even today as we speak, people who are accepted into Peace Corps, the volunteers, the criteria, if I'm not mistaken, is American citizens. Like that in itself, you can't have decolonization when one party is benefiting, when one party is allowed in and everyone else is just supposed to accept what comes into their homes or their communities. What would be most effective? What would decolonization look like for me, for example, would be rather than send 20 American citizens to a community or to a country like Uganda, why not have even half of 20, just 10 people from different Ugandan communities taken to the United States for the very duration that Peace Corps volunteers are here. They can acquire as many skills as they could and then go back to their home countries. And you could measure the impact and find that that would be more effective, that would be more impactful positively than having someone who just wants to have a life-changing experience, go into a plane, go into a community, benefit from the power dynamics at play, do whatever they want to do at the expense of these communities, and just go back home, have it on their CV, get appointed to all these multiple or volunteer international organizational jobs. That's the truth that we're living in. That decolonization in a way doesn't seem to be happening from Peace Corps if it keeps on sustaining the very same structures that it was founded on. You can't say abolish the gun, or rather not even abolish the gun. You can't say decolonize the gun. The gun in itself wasn't made for peace. So if you think you will have peace by the gun, that wouldn't be peace. That would be intimidation or silencing of other individuals.
Sorry to
Thank you all.
interrupt. I had just a follow-up. I didn't quite understand your statements, but I believe Peace Corps is an American organization or agency within the U.S. government that works on behalf or at the invitation of host countries. So I think there's an example of Peace Corps leaving a country. I think it was South Korea at one point when Koreans said that they didn't need volunteers. So I think the idea of that kind of exchange is present within the U.S. government. They have YALI and other initiatives that seeks out talented nationals or Africans, in the case of YALI, that have that exchange and have that connection to understand the differences and the cultural differences between Americans and, in this case of YALI, Africans. So I'm just trying to understand the direction you're trying to go in terms of decolonizing Peace Corps, because it'll be incumbent upon the host country to go to the organization and say, we don't need you anymore. We have our talent in place, our local talent that are capable of developing your own country. So I think that's the direction that you should look at also. And I think it talks to a bigger point of, are a lot of these countries actually decolonized? I mean, you see in West Africa, French are still very active in meddling in local politics. And I think that's a self-reflection that should be also considered.
Thank you for the question.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Wendy always speaks to this really, sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight that those are not actually invitations by host countries. They don't qualify.
So I think this to relate to what the gentleman has shared is to fail to acknowledge that most of the host countries are overly exploited countries. We're talking about Black and Brown communities. And I think to highlight what you shared is to fail to see that these countries, because of imperialism, neocolonialism, the continuation of colonization, do not have a say in most of these issues. There is continuous, consistent meddling of the countries that formerly colonized them into their affairs even today. I remember at the start of the session, I did share how, Uganda got, not that specific example, we got our independence in 1962, okay? The Union Jack was lowered, then the Ugandan flag was raised. But at this point, it's 2020, our education curriculum is very British. Our nieces and nephews are learning things in school like missionaries came to soften our hearts. The education system has been created in such a way that the students cannot criticize. The students have to welcome whatever comes from the global north in, oh my God, we were waiting for you to save us. Because that's how the global system of white supremacy operates, okay? whiteness is the default, okay? In this case scenario, whatever the colonial government said was the default. And to stress, it did not end, it's still functioning. The Uganda's judicial system functions on colonial laws, and the Ugandan police is using these same colonial laws that the British, imperialists use to rule or to run the country. So I guess you say this because you do not understand the power dynamics at play. You do not understand that a country like Uganda cannot say, or the US, no, we would like to do things this way. To point out, look at every African leader that has said no to imperial and how they've been portrayed. I would start with Gaddafi, Libya. I'm not saying he did the best. I will start with Mugabe. The system is hijacked. These leaders are meant to look like though they had was a mental case. They were dictators. They were corrupt. That's if you try to question the so-called quote unquote global North power government. So it's not a matter of these host countries have to say this is what they want and this is not they want. There is a power imbalance. You take it or leave it. There's no negotiating. I don't know how familiar you are with decolonial and colonization discourses, but you should be familiar with this. Then you will understand that it's not a matter of saying, oh no. And this is why we as an organization are, trying to see that there's a shift, at least right from a young age, from folks like us, at least there's a shift in curriculums at universities, the ethics that informs these institutions of higher learning. So to highlight, to sum it up, when we talk about colonization, it's important that we don't not talk about it as something that's talked. We need to talk about it as coloniality of the state of the mind, of the structures and institutions, and of the puppet leaders that are installed into this system.
Thank you, Wendy. I just wanted to add on and give examples. Just recently, when Uganda was invited to the table with the United States about the import of fast fashion or used clothes, and Uganda said no, the United States threatened to stop all form of aid. That's one example. Second example is the previous decade. At the application of funds from the World Bank, there was a quote within the clause, within the contract, that African nations had to give up the access or rights to their water bodies. And if they said no, that would qualify as a dismissal for aid. The last one is the Kill the Gay bill in Uganda. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but it's an infamous bill that would legalize the murder of LGBTQ plus individuals. And that bill, for the most part, came because of aid, where we had to have the bill signed, otherwise we wouldn't get aid. And then we had to rescind the bill, otherwise we wouldn't get aid. So when people mention invitation or sits or talks at the table, it's not actually a talk, it's more of commands that come in, and we have to accept them whether we like it or not, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, the very formation of Peace Corps wasn't something equal. I think it was John F. Kennedy, and he went to West Africa. But look at the power dynamics, a West African nation and the United States with all its nuclear power, and continued history of interference in foreign nations. There is no way that you can have decolonization when the United States as itself can't give up power. And I'd mentioned previously decolonization in action, what it looks like, and challenging power dynamics. The United States as a country isn't famous for that. It isn't known for that.
I don't know. I mean, Peace Corps was developed during the Cold War, and it was a very specific objective to send Americans overseas to kind of instill that narrative about democracy and the fight against communism. So, you know, I do agree that it hasn't really evolved over the last 60 years that it's been in existence, but it came on the heels of the, I guess, the decolonization from the British and the Europeans in many African countries, specifically in Ghana, where it first started. So, you know, I think there is a need to evolve and grow the organization in terms of, you know, abolishing or decolonizing it in a way that works in coordination or in tandem with the development of each of their countries that they're working in, or the host country. You know, I think that's pretty much all I can say right now, but it's a very interesting viewpoint that you guys are having on this topic.
Yeah, thank you all that have attended, all those that have shared their thoughts. We are up and we have to say bye for now. Jenna, would you like to come and close up the conversation?
Wendy, I was just saying to Michelle, we could take just to not end so abruptly, if it's okay. Anyone who needs to hop off is welcome to hop off. But anyone who can stay for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, just want to give people time to put their final thoughts in the chat and transition out, if that's okay. So maybe 5 more minutes and we'll start transitioning out. Does anyone want to unmute and ask a final question or make a final comment?
Yes. Hi,
Okay.
Kelsey. This is Jade Wu. Since I've worked in at least 6 countries abroad now, I've often thought as an American, how would we feel if suddenly this country, the US, was in a bad state in some way, and foreigners came in and started telling us that they're going to teach us how to do things, how to improve. And they started filtering into our governmental departments, the Treasury, Department of State. How would we feel? And they started giving us training, and the training is in a different language. Yes, we'll have interpreters, but I often thought about that context in the opposite way and how we Americans would respond to that. And so I think that when we Americans see it that way, if that were to happen to us, we would be more sensitive when we go abroad doing the work that we do.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Jade. And I think it's a more honest and empathetic approach to this conversation. And it's one that's not conducive to whiteness. And it's not conducive to American exceptionalism or individualism. It is, that's definitely, we export out that American individualism and exceptionalism. And I worry seriously about the ways in which that is manifested through the Peace Corps. Because we're bringing folks in who don't have any real knowledge. A few weeks or a few months of language immersion and cultural, I'm 11, let me just preface that by saying I'm 11 years in and out of Uganda, probably spent 6 or 7 years in Uganda. The more time I'm there, the more I realize I don't know. The more I realize how little expertise and knowledge I have, because I come from a completely different socialization, completely different language, completely different culture. How in the world can I know what's best for communities halfway across the world? So I think that we have to just start getting honest, right? And it's when we talk about whiteness as an ideology or the white savior complex as an ideology and a set of beliefs, anyone can opt in or opt out. This is a reward and punishment system. People who align with whiteness and white supremacy and anti-Blackness are rewarded, whether you are white, non-white, but within a system built on white supremacy and anti-Blackness, you get ahead by aligning with oppression. We have to be honest about that as well. So if I saw another question in the chat about if white people should even be applying to jobs in the development sector. My background's in social work. I have a master's in social work. I have also seen how many ways in which the systems of harm exist within social work, ways white social workers, in particular white women, we have been part of causing tremendous harm in communities that are not white, in Black communities in particular. And I think we have to ask ourselves, if we're in that system, are we willing to use that positionality and use our identity and our privilege in a way in which there's actually risk and cost involved, in a way that we are disrupting? Or are we just going to kind of fall in line and kind of like work towards the status quo and not take risks? Because we honestly, a lot of times, if we really get honest with ourselves, we're not willing to make those sacrifices. We're not willing to push the envelope. We're not willing to risk our jobs. And if we're really about it, and we're not just trying to be a performative ally or talk about these things in theory, we actually have to put these things into practice, and we have to be willing to go in and disrupt. And that will take risk. But I think the more we pay attention, the more we listen, to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, to queer people, to trans folks, to people of all different intersecting and marginalized identities, we have to be willing to listen to those voices, put those voices at the forefront of our organizations and the work we're doing, and to make drastic changes. Because a lot of us are going to sit on this call, have these conversations, and we're going to have theoretical discussions, but we're not going to put it into practice, because putting into practice takes work. Putting it into practice is not popular, and putting into practice takes real risk. But it's absolutely necessary if we want to actually be about the things we say we do.
Thank you so much for this discussion. That's a question that I was grappling with so often. I grew up in Bamako in Mali, but of course I grew up in the rich class going to an American school. And so just wondering I would love to go back home. I'd love to go back to Mali. I'm in the US currently, but wondering what kind of action like, how do you work within a system that is so, could you share some examples of actions that you are taking that do disrupt the system, that do bring real help instead of just further colonization?
There have to be consequences for racism and white supremacy. There have to be consequences for anti-Blackness. If we're specifically talking about the legacy of colonialism, unless there's consequences for perpetuating harm, and that just can't happen. We should be fair. I think we need to be honest. As an organization, we believe Peace Corps needs to be abolished, and I know it's been said. That doesn't mean there can be no help and no relationship. It just means it literally cannot look anything like it does. For it to be anything decolonial, anything honest, in terms of the way that it's actually functioning, it has to look drastically different. If any of us are really just about truth telling, that's the case. And so I think that practicality is, I think investing, like paying attention and supporting and investing in what Decolonizing Peace Corps has going on, especially even if you have hesitancy and it's like, oh man, I'm more on the reform side. Start listening to voices that challenge and push the envelope and make you uncomfortable, and be slow to speak and slow to ask questions right away and get defensive. Sit in the discomfort, try to actually unpack and understand what that discomfort is coming from. Because a lot of it really is rooted in that white people, we've been overhumanized in a system of white supremacy and anti-Blackness. We've been overhumanized as Black people have been dehumanized to the greatest extent within the system of white supremacy. So we have this inflated sense of self and a very dishonest sense of self, an idea of who we are, what countries we come from. We see that in American exceptionalism. So it's coming back to our humanity. If we're looking at achieving equity, we have to come to our humanity, and we have to come down. And Black folks have every right and every divine authority to be able to come up, right? So that's where the equity comes in. And I don't think I don't think if we actually are working to achieve that, then when we mess up, when we make mistakes, we don't have to get defensive because we're no longer trying to maintain or uphold this idea that we are these extraordinary human beings. It's just more honest about what our past has been, about the ways in which we benefit from this system. And then we can move forward in a more equitable direction. But yeah, I think that it's challenging it from the interpersonal. Unless you're really actively working to become anti-racist, there's a ton of resources. I know that Decolonizing Peace Corps has probably already recommended to folks, but Black-led and BIPOC-led educational resources that will help you in the interpersonal, that will then help you in the systemic approach. But I know that we're running short on time. We're actually way over time. So I don't know if anyone else has any last words.
I just wanted to highlight what someone had mentioned, Roman, if I'm not mistaken, about how if very many of the national staff were involved in this meeting, would they be able to even freely express themselves? And truth be told, the answers wouldn't be what many of you would love to hear. I personally, as a Ugandan, wouldn't even want Peace Corps to be here. Why should individuals come with foreign ideology, come to Uganda, do whatever they want in the name of help, but I cannot do the same? You know, that in itself, the continuous upholding and maintaining of that uneven power dynamic, and the fact that even nationals who work in Peace Corps can't even freely express themselves. Otherwise, you are labeled a rebel. You are fired from your job, you know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This is Jenna from RPCW. Thank you, Olivia, Kelsey, Rwothomio, and Wendy for this incredible presentation. We really, really appreciate it. We'll discuss with No White Saviors and the attendees ways to further these discussions. So we'll send a follow-up email, and hopefully the recording worked as well. We'll send that too, but I don't trust Zoom. I've been having issues. But I just want to thank everyone so much for engaging, and we're going to do what we can to continue these conversations. Have a really great day.